Imagine this. You're sitting in an elegant restaurant. The lights are dim. Soft music plays in the background. A waiter arrives with 2 glasses of wine, and then he says something that completely changes the experience. This wine costs $10, and this one costs $100. Suddenly, everything changes. People start smelling the expensive glass more carefully. They sip it slower. They say things like, "Wow, this one feels more sophisticated." So much smoother. You can definitely taste the quality. But here's the question that has confused even scientists and wine experts for years. What if I told you that in many experiments, people couldn't actually tell the difference? Even worse, what if the $10 wine and the $100 wine tasted exactly the same? Because the truth is, taste doesn't happen only on your tongue. It happens in your brain, and that means a label, a price tag, or even an elegant bottle. It can literally change the way you experience flavor. So today, we're going to uncover something fascinating. Why do some bottles cost more than a smartphone? Does expensive wine really taste better? Or is our brain simply selling us an illusion of luxury? At first glance, wine seems pretty simple. Grapes, fermentation, bottle, end of story. But behind a single glass, there's a massive industry where some wines cost less than a burger, while others cost more than a plane ticket. So, what's really going on? Why do some bottles cost $10 while others reach hundreds or even thousands? The answer begins long before the wine reaches the bottle. It begins in the land itself. Because in the wine world, there's a word producers treat almost like something sacred: terroir. Terroir is basically the combination of everything surrounding the grape: the climate, the soil, the temperature, the humidity, the altitude, even the amount of sunlight each vine receives. And yes, all of that can change the final flavor. That's why certain regions became legendary. In places like Bordeaux in France, Napa Valley in the United States, or Tuscany in Italy, they don't just produce wine, they produce prestige. And that's where things start getting interesting, because many times, when someone buys an expensive bottle, they're not just buying flavor, they're buying reputation, history, exclusivity, the feeling of drinking something special. And then there's production. Cheap wine is usually made on a massive scale. Thousands, sometimes millions of bottles. Machines handle almost everything: harvesting, fermentation, bottling. The goal is to produce more, faster, and cheaper. But expensive wines often do the exact opposite. Some small wineries produce extremely limited quantities, sometimes only a few thousand bottles per year. The grapes may be picked by hand, each barrel may be checked individually, and the entire process can take years, literally years, because many premium wines age in oak barrels for long periods of time. And those barrels aren't cheap either, especially French oak barrels. A single high-quality barrel can cost more than $1,000. And that doesn't even include storage, temperature control, space, time, and the fact that while the wine ages, the company still isn't making money. It's a slow investment, a very slow one. But here comes something even more important: marketing. Because in the wine world, perception can be almost as valuable as flavor itself. The shape of the bottle, the label, the design, the story behind the brand. Scores from famous critics, even the restaurant where you drink it. All of it changes the experience. And even if we don't notice it, it also changes our expectations. Because when our brain hears this wine costs $100, it automatically expects something extraordinary. And that expectation can completely change what we feel when we taste it. And this is where the story stops being only about wine and starts becoming a story about the human brain. Because it turns out, taste doesn't work the way we think it does. Most of us imagine tasting something as simple. The tongue detects flavor, and the brain simply receives the information. But reality is much stranger than that. The brain doesn't just receive flavor, it interprets it, it modifies it, and sometimes it can even invent it. To prove this, several scientists conducted experiments that ended up shocking even wine experts. In one of the most famous studies, researchers gathered people to taste different wines. But there was a trick. Some glasses contained the exact same wine. The only difference was the price they were told. One group heard, "This wine is cheap." The other heard, "This wine is premium." And almost instantly, the reactions changed. The people who believed they were drinking the expensive wine described it as more elegant, more complex, more refined, smoother. Some even said they enjoyed the experience more. But here's the shocking part. It was literally the same wine, the same bottle, the same liquid. So, what was happening? Well, scientists discovered something fascinating. When we believe something is expensive or exclusive, the brain can activate areas linked to pleasure and reward. In other words, if you expect something to be better, your brain can make it actually feel better. It's basically a luxury placebo effect, and this doesn't happen only with wine. It also happens with perfumes, designer clothing, expensive coffee, luxury restaurants, and even medicine. In fact, in some medical studies, people reported more pain relief from more expensive medication, even when it was exactly the same as the cheaper version. That reveals something incredible. Our experience of the world doesn't depend only on reality. It also depends on what we believe about that reality. And wine is one of the best examples of this. Because wine isn't tasted only with the mouth. It's tasted with the eyes, expectations, the environment, memory, and even a social status. That's why an elegant bottle, not a sophisticated label, or hearing an amazing story about the vineyard can completely change how you perceive the flavor. Your brain starts building the experience before the wine even touches your tongue. And honestly, that makes wine far more interesting. Because in the end, the big question is no longer simply, which one tastes better? The real question is, what does better even mean? Many experts truly can identify real differences between wines. They can detect the type of grape, the region, the acidity level, the aging process, even subtle notes of fruit, wood, or spices. But here's the interesting part. Even they sometimes fail. And some of the most famous wine tests in history revealed something pretty uncomfortable for the wine industry. In multiple blind tastings, where labels and prices disappear, some experts confused cheap wines with extremely expensive ones. In certain competitions, affordable wines defeated luxury bottles. And that was an absolute shock, because suddenly a dangerous question appeared. If even experts can get it wrong, how much of the wine world truly depends on flavor, and how much depends on reputation? But careful. This is where it's important not to fall into the idea that everything is fake. Because it isn't. Real differences absolutely do exist, especially in highly complex or premium wines. Some have more depth, better balance, richer aromas, smoother texture, and flavors that evolve as you drink them. The problem is that detecting those differences requires training. And this is probably where many people disconnect from the world of wine, because suddenly words start appearing like tannins, acidity, body, mineral notes, long finish, and descriptions so strange they sound almost ridiculous. Things like hints of wet leather with black cherry and tobacco smoke. And honestly, for someone just getting started, all of this can sound completely absurd. But behind those words, there's actually real science. Wine is one of the most chemically complex drinks on Earth. It contains hundreds of different aromatic compounds, and each one can affect the way we perceive flavor. For example, acidity makes wine feel fresher and brighter. Tannins, which mainly come from grape skins, seeds, and oak barrels, create that dry or rough sensation in your mouth. Sugar adds sweetness. Alcohol creates warmth. And then there are aromas. Because a huge part of what we call taste actually comes from smell. That's why when you have a cold, food suddenly seems flavorless. The brain combines smell, texture, temperature, memory, and chemical signals from the tongue to build what we experience as flavor. And that makes wine incredibly subjective. Two people can focus on completely different things inside the exact same glass. One may notice the fruit, another the wood. Another may simply think, this tastes strong. And none of them are necessarily wrong. On top of that, wine constantly changes. Temperature can completely alter the flavor, so can time. A wine that was just opened may taste very different 20 minutes later. Because once it comes into contact with oxygen, its chemical compounds begin to transform. That's why some people let wine breathe before drinking it. And this is where wine starts feeling more like art than just a beverage. Because it's not only about detecting flavors, it's about interpreting an experience. And the more someone learns about wine, the more details they begin to notice. But here's something even stranger. The taste of wine doesn't depend only on the bottle. It also depends on everything around you while you drink it. The lighting, the music, the restaurant, the people around you, even your mood. All of these things can literally change the way wine tastes. And yes, science has actually studied this. In some experiments, researchers discovered that music can change how people describe wine. Elegant music made wine seem more refined. More intense music made flavors seem stronger. Because the brain doesn't experience things separately. It blends everything together into one single experience. And that's why wine can taste incredible on vacation, but completely ordinary months later at home. Because you're not only remembering the flavor, you're remembering the moment. And then there's social pressure. Many people don't want to look like they don't understand wine. So, in elegant settings surrounded by people describing complex aromas, many start convincing themselves they taste those things too. Not because they're lying, but because the human brain is deeply influenced by expectations and social context. And wine, more than almost any other drink, is filled with symbols of luxury, status, culture, and sophistication. That's why an expensive bottle can feel different, even before it's opened. Because part of what we're consuming, it isn't just wine, it's meaning. So is it worth it? There is something called the law of diminishing returns. The difference between a $10 wine and a $30 one is massive, and anyone can notice it. But the difference between a $50 and a $500 one is technical, subtle, and often purely emotional. Expensive wine is like a work of art. You pay for an author's vision, for the rarity of a place, and for the time that stood still in that bottle. But the best wine in the world will always be the one you enjoy with the right company, regardless of the number on the receipt. Thanks for joining us on Discovery Why. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us what wine has surprised you the most. See you.